Hello YouTubers. In this video, I'm going to show you two really fascinating things that you can do to supercharge your existing enterprise level APIs and web applications with both OData and Blazor, incorporating some of the latest and greatest UI libraries that can actually boost your productivity really largely when it comes to kind of implementing grids in Blazor. So I'm going to start from the API here. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what batching is. What is OData batching? The capability here, batching allows you to basically send an array or a list of API calls and execute them as one simple API call. What that basically means is that if you want to update a bunch of records and delete a bunch of records and modify a bunch of records, it doesn't make sense that you make a special request for each and every record individually. You can gather all that information up and send them all to the API as one API, one simple API call, and then get back a response that basically reflects the status of each and every one of them. So if one of them is failing, it doesn't impact the rest of the requests that are going on unless there is an interdependency between one request and another. Let me try to simplify this for you. I'm gonna open up the Blackboard here real quick, and I'm gonna try to explain this a little bit better in terms of implementation. So here's a Blackboard, and let me just show you here what we're talking about. Assume that you have a UI application in here. This is a UI application. And this UI has an API sitting in front of it, right? So that's your API right here. And your UI has a grid. So people go on that grid, let's say multiple employees from multiple places, they're sitting in and they're entering data. They're going back and forth and modifying the data and all that kind of stuff. Now, in some of the situations that we have today, what really happens is that you'll see people kind of send a request per record, right? So for every record that happens in your system, a new request gets sent to the API. Every record, a new request gets sent to the API, so on and so forth like this. Usually that's very dangerous because if you're still in the middle of your work and you're not ready yet to save or actually persist that work, APIs that have dependency on other events downstream like notifications and stuff like this, or need to propagate the event to other, systems, this can be very dangerous. Imagine if your API is sending a notification event to a service bus, for instance, like an event bus or a service bus, and you have listeners beyond that point, multiple listeners listening to the service bus. It makes much more sense if you let your clients, the people that are using your system, actually use this as, I'm going to say listener in here. It makes more sense that you let the listeners to that event kind of wait and wait until your client is actually done with all the work that they're doing before you actually send that request over to the API, right? This is what OData batching does. It takes all of this away and encapsulate all of it in one simple API request. And this is groundbreaking. This is something that you can use today. You leverage existing API capabilities like the normal CRUD operation, post and put and delete and modify and all that, and retrieve and get and all that. You can still leverage these capabilities, but you're wrapping all of it up in an OData request that's an OData batch. Okay, how do we do that? How do we go about, I have an existing API and the existing API has all the CRUD operations. How do I go out there and enable OData batching in my service? So let me increase the font here real quick just so people see the code, because we're going to be doing a little bit of coding today, and I'm going to show you here how amazing this capability is. So here we go. Okay, so I'm gonna use the open source, this amazing project, OtripleS project. I really didn't think that project would go super far, and the adaptation and the commitment from the community to support this project and make sure that it works. It's really heartwarming to see the support from the community. But I'm gonna be pulling a a fresh copy from the master branch here, and I just want to make sure that everything is building as expected. So I'm just gonna run. This is a huge project. It has a lot of APIs that basically support all the capabilities that you might need, to basically run a schooling system. And we're continuing on daily basis to really add in more stuff. We're upgrading the standard these days. We're going in and adding the new validation standard, and we continue to try to keep this project up to date. There's a lot of work to do in here, code rubs, validation upgrade, thinking about certain capabilities. Anyway, that's how the project is today. Let's just make sure before we do anything, and that's the beauty of having unit tests and acceptance tests. It'll tell you that your project that you just pulled from the outside world, that you just pulled from the web, from the master branch, that it's in a good state, right? So I'm just gonna run my acceptance tests here real quick. Acceptance tests take a little bit of time because it's actually hitting your storage and coming back. So let's just give that one a second. Here we go. See, these results here is just an assurance that your API and your APIs and your system is in a good state. This is why engineers put an investment. See, a large system like this, like OtripleS today has hundreds of thousands of lines of code, and it has a lot of work that went into it. And there's no way that you can tell if one line of code has changed without you noticing. There's no way you can tell whether your system is in a healthy state or not. The only assurance that you can get is when you write unit tests and acceptances. That's what's going to give you that kind of, ability to be able to go and say, yeah, my system is in a healthy state. Okay, acceptance test has passed. It took about 51 seconds. Now, unit tests, let's run all 1,532 tests in here real quick. And that one passed real quick. It just took a second, and we basically ran all of this, and it's all in good state. Okay, so now I know that my master branch is in a good state. Let's create a new branch here real quick just for the people that will want to see exactly what changes I made. I'm going to go here and say users, Hassan, Habib, and then I'm going to say, code rub. This is a code rub, and this is an upgrade, add OData Batch capability. Okay. So how are we going to install that? Let's first go and install OData. I noticed that my OtripleS project doesn't have OData in it. That's such a shame because I really love OData and I add it into everything and anything that I use. So I guess it's time for us to go and add OData. I'm going to go add OData in here. There's two things that I want to add. OData Newton Soft, which is a version of OData that would allow us to kind of like Newton Soft in and of itself, alone doesn't quite understand how OData does the mapping. So Sam Zhu and the OData team, basically, he's a tech lead on OData team at Microsoft. He basically went in and released his own version of Newton Soft. It's called OData Newton Soft JSON. So there's that one. And then I'm going to go ahead and install the actual OData library, which is the ASP.NET OData. So let's get this one here, ASP.NET Core version 8.3. I guess Sam just released that 8.3 version. I think that's a very, very new version. So let's go ahead and install this one. Here we go. So these are two libraries, right? OData Newton Soft and OData ASP.NET Core OData 8.3. And the project's running is on .NET 6, so we should be just fine. Okay, so we have all this in place. Let's just go ahead and start adding OData batching to our system, right? So here I'm going to zoom in on the code here, and we're going to start really simple. So here we go. So first of all, I need an EDM model, right? OData batching really relies heavily on building an EDM model for the endpoint that you want to work with, right? Whether you're working students, teachers, whatever the case may be, you need to build that EDM model. Let's start with that. So I'm going to go at the very bottom here and say private EDM model like this. I'm going to go and say get EDM model. Here we go. And then I'm going to go and say OData convention, something to that effect. And new OData convention model. I think it's something like that. I can never remember the exact syntax. Let me pull that up from somewhere. So it says get ADM. And you don't have to remember all of that. It's just if the model is a little bit too long and all of that kind of stuff, just go ahead and yeah, OData convention model builder. It's a little bit of a long a model, but here we are. Okay, so is this guy, and then I'm gonna go up in here and say this OData. I'm gonna call that builder now because builder makes more sense in here. And then I'm gonna go and say builder dot, and then I'm gonna go and say get entity set. entity set, and the entity set, that the entity that we're going to be targeting today are students, the student entity. So I'm just going to go ahead and say this is a students entity, and then return the builder.getADM model. Okay, so we need that ADM model so we can educate OData about what we're doing here. Okay. Okay, so we have the EDM model. The other thing that I want to do here to add OData, I want to go up in the configure service in here, and I'm going to go up in here and say application builder.use OData like this. This is use OData. Sorry, use batching. Use batching. Use OData batch. See this guy. Here we go. There you go. Use OData batching. Okay. So in the configure area, from the application builder, use OData batching. And I created the EDM model down here. Okay, what else do I need to do? Let's go ahead and configure our OData. First of all, I can go up in here and say add OData. There you go. And out of these options, I can go and say, okay, for this OData, I need to add in the capabilities of OData. So I'm just going to go here and add the components route, options.add component route, add route components. And I want this to still be my alias, my prefix for the route to still be the API. And let's give that an alias in here. So that's route prefix like this. And then I also want to go and say the EDM model. So that's the next thing that I need to do here. So this is get EDM model. That's the method that we just created. And I'm going to add the argument name in here, which is the model. And then the last thing I want to add here is the batch handler. The batch handler. And this batching piece, this is the piece that's going to make your API super powerful and can offer batching capabilities. How do we do that? I'm going to go here and say OData default, OData batch handler. And I'm going to initialize this by OData default batch handler. I think that's the name of that model. Let's see if I can remember this directly. Default OData batch handler, something like that. There it is. Default OData batch handler. Okay. So I have this piece in here. Now I need to give that batch handler some control, because batching basically opens up the door for people to do whatever they want with your system. So I'm just going to talk here about the message quotas, the messages that you can send. You know, what's the size? Maybe 100 bytes is good enough. You know, batch OData message quotas. Maybe, you know, we want to say max nesting depth. How much nesting do you want to happen? You know, we can also add things like, again, from the message quotas, we can add things like, let's see, match operations per set. I'm going to say 10. So I'm basically saying the message size cannot be more than 100 bytes. That should be more than enough. And then in here, if you see in the description, that's the maximum number of bytes that could read from a message. And then maximum nesting depth. And then in here, the maximum operations per change set. Okay. Now I can go and take that OData batch handler and just throw it in here, and everything should be good and dandy. Okay, so that's my batch handler. And then I need to be able to close this here. So now I'm closing this. Now someone might tell me, Hassan, what if I still want to have the other capabilities of OData? I'd say absolutely go ahead in here and add select, filter, order by, and the order by, and then there is max stop. You know, you can set max stop. There is also expand. Expand is one of my favorite as well. So now you added all the OData capabilities in here, including OData batching. Okay, so bear with me here, because this is not very commonly discussed topic, and I'm going to show you some really mind-blowing stuff today. I'm going to give you the source code. You're going to have a lot of fun with me today. Okay. So this way I set up the OData batching in here. I set up everything good and dandy. Let me go up in here, and while I'm at it, and this is not something that you have to do necessarily for this batching operations, but I'm going to go to the students controller and just do enable OData on the get all students. So I'm just going to go up in here and say enable OData, enable query, sorry, on the get all students, just to make sure that actually, you know, OData is working in this system. All right. Now that this is all good and dandy, this is all working, let's just make sure that our system still builds and that our changes didn't break any existing capabilities. Let's go do that. Here we go. All right, so here's your OData capability, and let's run our acceptance test. Not necessarily unit test, because I really didn't change anything in the business logic. I'm mainly changing things on the controller level. So I want to make sure still that my end-to-end is still functional and successful as expected. So I'm going to go up in here and say right-click run, and I'm going to run all my APIs just to make sure, my OData work didn't break anything. Here we go. Let's give it a second there. There we go. I'm mainly focusing on anything that's student related, because this is where I say set the batching capabilities. Give me that ADM model and set the batching capabilities in there. Okay, so there's one issue in here, and this is an issue that I just saw happening. For some reason, it has a problem with the naming convention that I have for post student. I'm just gonna go up in here just temporarily. I'm gonna say add student just for now. Once you do that, it just, you don't have this problem anymore. And, I already know about this problem. I already saw this problem. I'm going to have to follow up with OData team just see what's going on there. But for some reason, post student async, it doesn't let it work. It basically violates the naming convention, and it basically make it a little bit harder for. But once you change the name, for some reason, things are just working as expected. So this is one thing on the side. I didn't really want to take this away from the video because I want you to be aware if you're building this and you're using post student or post something async, somehow the OData batch capability is going to freak out for some reason. Okay, so let me just make sure the rest of these tests are running. So let me actually pick up just the failing ones and just run all of them. Let's just make sure that these tests are running. This is, again, that's the beauty of having acceptance tests. It'll tell you, before you deploy to production and, go and tell people, hey, I have a new API capability, that this issue is happening. Okay, so here we go. All right, so it's all good and dandy. Just a weird naming convention thing around the post that's making this not work. I still don't know why it's doing that, but here we are. We're in this stage now, and we have this established, and we have OData running. Now let's go test this, right? First of all, let's just make sure that OData is working in general. Like we had enable OData query on get all students. We need to just go and figure out, whether OData is actually still functional. Let's go and do this. So here's API/students. Should have a bunch of students in there. Here's OData students. And then I can go here and say $ select first name. Is it going to select only first name for me? Oh, before I forget that, see, this is another thing that I need to make sure I do. When you're setting up OData in your startup CS, there's a bunch of things that you have to do here. But when you're setting OData in your startup CS, you want to probably, before you do even add OData, you want to go and say add OData Newton soft. Newton soft JSON, something like that. Let me control period here. Come on, let's see. Add OData. If I pull this guy here, it will actually help me out using OData Microsoft dot OData dot let's see, JSON dot, I think that's it at this point here. So if I go here and say add OData Newton soft JSON, I should probably pull some reference for me. Some references for me. There it is. So add OData Newton soft JSON. And why is that? Because once you add OData, OData has its own serializer. When I talked to Sam Zhu about this, OData has its own serializer, and sometimes it overrides your existing Newton soft kind of implementation in place, or the existing library for OData that you have for Newton soft that you have in place. So you're gonna have to add OData Newton soft JSON in here. It's a little bit of steps, but it's totally worth it. I'll show you what this does for your API. It's going to make your API much more powerful than you can ever imagine. Okay, especially with .NET 6, you're going to have to add this OData Newton soft JSON library that I installed earlier in this video. Now let's just go back to our API here. Here we go. Give it a second there. I'm gonna shut this down and start over. Here we go. All right, here we go. And then I'm gonna say API/students, and then select first name. Is this gonna work for me? There you go. So now it's selecting, particular names. If I replace this with filter equal first name equal, and then say Sean, for instance. Is it working? Yeah, it picked up Sean for me. So now OData, I know that OData is working. I can do filtering, I can do ordering. If I do order by equal first name like this, I think that should work. Specified with out of range, order by. I need to go look back and see why order by is acting funny, because it's one that's really, yeah, there it is. I just need to say order by instead without having the B uppercase B. So just order by without the B uppercase. So this starts with Brian, Brittany, Hassan, and then Sean, and then Shri. So this is basically the order of things here. So now I know that OData is working. But let's now add the batching capability to it. And this is where the good stuff happens. Let me show you here real quick what this does. So this is my API endpoint here. I'm going to pick up my API endpoint and I'm going to go to Postman. Hope you can see Postman here. And I'm going to post a simple JSON component. And instead of my API endpoint all the way up to an API, you just got to do something like this, /batch, like this. Okay, so that's the endpoint that I'm working with. And then here's the request that I'm going to be adding. I'm going to add something called requests like this. And this request is an array of requests that you're sending to your API. Array of requests, a whole bunch of requests that you're sending to your API. Let me zoom out here a little bit just so people can see what I'm doing. Okay, here you go. And then inside these requests, you could have many of these requests. Let me show you. I'm gonna add in a couple of these. I'm gonna go in here and say, let's give that request an ID. That ID can be anything really. Can be a string. You can do out of the box. Postman will give you GUID like this. You can say the URL that I'm targeting is /students $, let's say filter first name equal Sean, like this. So here's one. And then let's go with the method that I want to pass in. It's a get, right? It's a get request. And then what else do I want to add here? I want to there is really no body in here, so I don't think you would need a body, but you also need headers. And in headers, you can add in what kind of headers you want to add. It's like, see, you're building a list of requests within your system. And then I can go here and say content type something like, I don't know, application/JSON. Like this. So here it is, ID, URL, method, headers. I think we should be good. If I hit that guy as a post like this, let's see what it does. Look, I sent requests and it returned back response. It says response 404. Let's see why it's saying response 404. I don't think I need the slash in front of students. I think it's just like this. Does this work? Yeah, there you go. So it went and picked up Sean as a request, as a response to my API call, right? What that basically means is that I can add as many requests as I want in here. I can go in here and say, this is a request for get. Maybe the next one, I'm gonna go and say, hey, give me a completely different, order in here. I'm gonna go and say select equal first name. Like this. So this second response that I'm sending, see, you're sending two different API calls. The first one is going to return the body for Sean. The second one is going to return a list of all the requests that you have in order like this. Can I add a delete? Can I add a delete? Yeah, of course I can. Let's pick up this ID here. This is an ID. Let's pick up Sean's record in here. We're going to pick up that ID in here. And I'm going to go up in here and say, in addition to the select and this, I want to do a delete. So I'm going to go up in here and say, here's another ID for another request. See, this is all happening within one request. That's the crazy thing about all of this. And then URL, and my URL is just students / the ID of that student, because that's how I do that delete. So I'm going to paste the ID in here, right? That's my URL. And then I'm going to go up in here and say method is delete, right? And maybe the headers, I want to go with the headers and say, let's see here for the headers. It's the same thing for the headers. I just want to go and say content type JSON. Let's post this and see what happens. Here we go. So what did it do? Did it actually delete, Sean? See, it went and said 200 delete. I deleted the record that you have. That means the next time I go and do filter and run the same thing, this one here is going to say I couldn't find a record called Sean. But at the very end here, it say 404 could not find student with the ID blah blah blah. Does that make sense? So that's basically what batching does. It allows you to send a whole bunch of requests the way you want to shape it. You want to post a new student. You want to add a new student. Like that student that, the students that we posted before, we can add those back. This is all out of the box. Just these simple steps that you can add that will basically add this batching capability. So now one API request can handle multiple, including the ones that, don't even make sense. It won't interrupt your existing requests that are coming back to your system. Okay, so that's the API part. Okay, you got the API part. That's very easy and simple. Okay, so I know now that I have an API that's running that will allow me to be able to go and do a bulk requests of any type, add, delete, whatever the case may be. Now let's jump to the second side of this, where we're going to go and say, I want to be able to leverage this in a Blazor application, right? So the backend stuff I took care of. I built an API broker here that does post, right? You post something to the API broker. This very same thing that we just worked on together, I basically built something called a batch request. And I'm going to share that code with you as well. No worries there. I built something called batch request, and this batch request has a bunch of requests inside of it. And every request has an ID, a URL, a method, a headers, and body, and all that kind of good stuff in there. Okay, so we have all of that in place. And I also had batch responses, which is basically something to encapsulate the responses, but I don't really care about that for now. It's out of my concern at this point. Okay. Now, we want to build a UI component, a grid, that can leverage this batching capability. So while people are working, they're adding things, they're deleting things, they're updating things. I don't want to interrupt their process until they click update, and then I take all these changes that they've made and send it over to the API so the API can process that request. How do we go about doing something like that? So I installed a library here, just like I showed before. I installed a nice library called Syncfusion. If you go into Manage NuGet Packages, I'll show you real quick how to set it up. I installed Syncfusion here, which is a nice Blazor library that gives you the kind of capability to kind of work with, very advanced Blazor API components and leverage these amazing capabilities that Syncfusion can give you outside the box, especially with grids. If you're working with grids and you want to build something that's worth its while, you want to pick up a third-party library like this one. Okay, now let's leverage Syncfusion in here to kind of build that system that we're trying to build in here. Now, let me show you here what we're going to need to do. Well, first and foremost, let's put together the grid. So I have referenced here the Syncfusion Blazor grids. I'm going to go up in here and say SF grid. So I'm building a grid from scratch, and I need a data source for that grid. Of course, you have to load the data that you have in the system first, so people can work with that data and edit it and modify it and all that kind of good stuff. So we probably need a backend for that first. Let's go and do the backend area for this stuff. I already have a broker in here that will give me the capability to retrieve students and all that kind of stuff, so no worries about that one. I just need to build in the back end of the front end. So let's go add a new file in here, and this file will be index.razor. Here it is, index.razor.cs. Okay, this is public partial class, and this guy inherit from component base. And I'll tell you why in a second, why we're doing that. Okay, so this is our component base. If you've been following my Blazor series, you'll see how amazing it is to be able to go and just set up your component in a way that's really simple, especially if you've never done UI work before. This is it. This is how you can work with Blazor applications to do that work. And I'm going to inject my API broker. So this API broker, API broker in here. This broker is what did I call it? I called it OtripleS API broker. So OtripleS API broker. This broker here is what's going to go call that API endpoint that has the batching enabled to go work with me. So this is API broker. That's my broker right here. Of course, this is a POC. Ideally, in the real world, we would do test-driven development, but I just want to show you the capabilities and the possibilities here before anything and everything. And then I want a list of students because that's what I'm going to feed my grid, right? I'm going to go here and say I want to feed my grid with some stuff. So this is here students. Okay, perfect. I have that. What else do I need? I could probably use the grid itself, but we will worry about that later. Let's do an override here, and let's say uninitialized async. And this uninitialized async will basically help me kind of get the data and assign it to these students so I can load the grid with some data. Right? So let's do that. So I'm going to go here and say this.students equals await this.api broker dot get all students async. All right. So all good and dandy. I'm adding in, I'm calling the API. The API is giving me the students, no harm, no foul, right? Let's make sure that this actually works. I'm going to go into my Razor, my index page here, and I'm going to add this SF grid. The simplest thing in the world, you go there and say data source like this, and you say students, right? That's all you have to do to kind of get a grid up and running with your data. Is that really true? Yeah, let's find out. Let's run this UI component since I have the API running already. Let's go ahead and run this API component and see how that one works. Check it out. Here we go. Here's my UI, and here you go. And in that UI, you can see here I'm loading all the data that I need, right? So it goes and pulls the data from the database, right? And it basically loads all that data in as it is. Okay, so now we can load the data. The next thing I want to do, I want to only select particular fields. Like I don't want to show the updated by, created by, all that kind of stuff. Normally I would create a view model that would take care of this problem for me. But there's other ways you can do that, right? There's other ways you can actually go and say, I want to control what's being displayed. If you're using this particular UI component with Syncfusion, it'll help you a lot kind of put that out there. So let me show you here what you can do. You can actually control the grid columns. So we can go here and say grid columns, like this. And inside these grid columns, you get to define each and every grid column that you care about. And that's really important. So let's start with the field name. What do you want your field name to be? The field name is the field name from the type that you're reading from. And this is really, really important because that's how you basically are telling the system, you know, that you're working with this particular field, so it can go pick up the value for you and assign it to this column that you're building, right? So this is name of, I'm going to go here and say student dot ID. So I'm starting with the ID, right? And now you get to control the header text. You get to go and say header text for this is, hold on, header text for this is ID, like this. I get to do that. And then I get to go tell Syncfusion if this is the primary key, because it's really important for the CRUD operations to know if this is the primary key that you determine whether this, you know, object is valid or not. I want to make sure that when I'm creating a new item, you know, let's look at all the options that we have, like allow adding, allow editing, and all that. We can add in here something like a validation rule. And you can add many rules on the fly. Of course, make sure that these rules live in your service layer, you know. But for now, actually, I'm just gonna, yeah, let's go ahead and add it in here just so people see what this looks like. But I'm gonna go here and say new validation rules like this, and you can add something like required equal true. Let me zoom out a little bit so people can see what this library can do. True, like this. So this is a validation rule that I have in here. Right? Where do you want to align the text? Text align. Well, I want the text alignment to be text align dot. Come on, give me an autocomplete. You can do left and right. I think you can do center as well. Let's put it in the center here. And then, you know, you can assign things like width and all that kind of stuff. That's all okay. So here's all the fields. And I don't think this guy, sorry, I'm building this like a model. I don't think it needs the comma, so I think we should be fine here. Here we go. Okay, so now what I just did is basically me going and identifying and saying, oh, display only the ID field from the data that I'm pulling in from the outside world. Let me show you what that looks like. If I run this real quick in here, look, it's showing only IDs. Only IDs in the entire field, because you can control what that looks like, you know, what you want your data to look like and all that. So now it's showing just IDs. Let's do the same with the rest. Let's just display, I don't want to display everything in the world. I just want to display maybe first, middle, and last name for now. And I'm going to disable the validations on the backend API so we just can simplify this for everybody who's watching. So I'm just going to go ahead and say first name. I want this to be first name. Its primary key is false by default, so I don't have to hit it. And maybe we should put them all left rather. Okay, let's do left. Align left, left, left. All of them are required. I want middle name. Maybe the middle name doesn't have to be super required. I'll set this one to false. Or just take away the validation rule completely if you don't care. Here you go. And then the same thing with last name. So first name, ID, first name, middle name, last name. That's all. Last name. Did I call this middle name? Yeah, middle name. And I can put validation rules in here. Okay, there you go. So now, when it renders this time, it's going to actually show me not just the ID, but it's going to show me all the other capabilities that come in, all the other attributes or properties that I care about. There you go. So check this out. Now I have only first name, middle name, last name. Now the grid itself is interacting. See how simple it is, and it's really simple and easy and clean. You have a grid that's really running real quick. But that's not where that grid power comes in. Like you know, we're gonna add some crazy stuff right now that's gonna make this even much better, much more powerful. Okay, so I have these guys in place. Now I want to do the integration piece. I want to be able to go and say, I want to enable the editing of this. I want to be able to add records, remove records, and do all that kind of good stuff. How do you go about doing something like that? In the grid itself, you can go here and say toolbar like this. And this toolbar will be just a list of strings. So I'm just going to go up in here and say, this here is a new list of strings. You can also identify it as an array, I think, as far as I remember. And you can add here all the capabilities. So I'm just going to go here and say add. I want to have add. I want to have delete. I want to have update like this. And I want to have cancel. These are technically all the CRUD operations you can dream of in a simple grid like this. And I'm going to show you in a second like how you're going to leverage all of these events to allow these capabilities to happen for each and every column. Like I said, just adding these buttons in here, it will display, because these are pre-configured sort of. So now if you just add these buttons in here, it will go and correspond to buttons that are actually working on the system. I think I forgot something in here. See, list, oh, string, like that. There you go. So let's see here. Let me run this again. Here we go. Now our grid is going to look a lot more interesting. So check this out. The grid now has all of these buttons in here. You see these at the top, but they're all disabled because we didn't allow them yet. They're not enabled yet. I'm saying these buttons are there, but I'm not enabling them yet. Let's go ahead and enable these buttons. See, just as simple as this. You're just adding in an array of strings, and all of a sudden your grid is much more powerful than ever before. Now we just want to activate those. So we're going to add another thing in our grid here. See how simple this library is. Grid settings, like this. And this, you know, sorry, grid edit settings. And these grid edit settings is what I'm going to allow adding. True. I want to allow, see, I'm now enabling these capabilities. Allow deleting. Yes. I want to allow, I need to stop doing the dot, and then allow editing. True. Right? And then the edit mode that I have in here, check this out. I'm gonna make the mode in here is gonna be edit mode dot batch. See, there's dialog that'll pop up a dialog so you can edit and modify things. There is normal where you're editing on the fly, so you add the record and it saves right away. But we're gonna do the batch this time, and I'm gonna show you how amazing and powerful this is in a second. Okay. So I have the toolbar set up, I have the settings set up, and I have the grid columns set up. All good and dandy, so clean, no problem there. Let's go ahead and see what that does for us. If I go and run this system right now, here we go. Now what I get here is that, see, these capabilities, these new capabilities that I have here are now active. I can go up in here and say add, and it will actually create a new record for me. I can go, let me copy an existing GUID. Here you go, and just change one number in it. And I can go here and say Hassan, this is required, and then Habib. See? I can now add these things. I can also go edit. I can go down here and say M. Right? I can delete existing records. I can go here and say delete this record in here. So now this is all batching process. Like it's collecting all the actions that I'm making, but it's so good that it's giving you the ability to actually see what has been edited and what has been modified in this particular grid that you're working with. Now here's the problem. When I click update, it says, okay, are you sure? Nothing happens. If I go and refresh my page like this, nothing happens. Why? Because I didn't attach OData Batching to this grid yet. And that's what I'm going to show you here in a second. Okay, let's jump back into Visual Studio here and let me show you what this does. There is something in here in that grid that we call grid events. And this grid events is Syncfusion way of saying, hey, you know, if you don't like the out-of-the-box capabilities, you can integrate with an API outside the box and all that. We can give you this capability of you going and catching these events and modifying the behavior of the UI component by yourself. How is this going to work? I'm going to educate the grid about the t-value. And then I'm going to go and say on batch save. See, there's on batch add, batch cancel, delete. I'm going to say on batch save, which is the update that you click on. And I'm just going to create a function here called on batch save. The function doesn't exist yet, but we're going to create it together. So I'm basically going here and saying, when I click update the grid, hit that function, right? Hit that on batch save function so I can start saving the records that are going on in the system. Okay, just something as simple as that. Okay, let's go down back here and create this on batch save function. What does this function look like? Of course, it's going to be asynchronous because we're going to call the API and send that data back. So I'm going to go and say on batch save, and this on batch save takes something called before batch save args, which are the arguments that get sent to you for the student component. It will map it for you, you know, and it will give you all the details you need. These args that come in has all the changes that your grid has done. So args dot changes, batch changes dot changed records, deleted records, added records. Right? These are the three things that could happen in your grid, right? Each one of them is a list of students. The simplest and easiest API I've ever seen. It takes literally a second to be able to go and say, give me all the things that got modified, all the things that got deleted, all the things that got added, and I'm going to send it all in one batch request. All right? Okay. So we know that. Now let's go ahead and build our batch request. So here's my batch request. This is new batch request. Remember when I told you the model here, I created this model here, which have a list of requests within it, and every request has a URL, it has an ID, it has a URL, it has all the different things that you can think of to kind of get going with the details. Okay. And inside this batch requests, in here, requests, in the function that I'm working on batch save, I'm gonna go here and say batch request.request. I'm gonna need to initialize this with a list, because I'm going to start adding things in there. And if you add to a list right away before you initialize it, what's going to happen? It's going to blow up, right? Because it's null. You can't add records to a null list. So you need to initialize it. Now here comes the fun part. I know which records that I have today that has the editing and the adding and the deleting and all that kind of good stuff. So let's iterate on those. So this is a student. This is added students. Check this out. In args.changes.added records. For added records, for every added record, I'm going to go and say batch request.request.add. And I'm going to create a new request, right? And that new request will have an ID, of course. We need an ID, so that's GUID.new GUID like this. So here's the GUID. .toString, because we made it a string, right? This ID. And then I need headers, so let's give it the headers. The headers are and these they differ from one place to the other. Like some wants the content type to be different, mixed slash. I'm gonna say application JSON here, and I think they're set up by default, but I want you to see that. So that's the headers, and then you're adding, right? So your method is gonna be, right, method dot post. This is a struct that I built. That you don't get that outside of the box. You actually have to go and create one as part of your models here. You'll go through the code and you'll see how it works. I promise you it's going to be really fun for you. Okay, so there's the post. And then the next thing that I want to do here is that the body. So the body here, where am I going to get that body from? Right? It's the student that we're iterating on. So that's added student that I want to add. So that's a student. It's actually not added yet, so let's just call it student. To be added student, so it's just student, right? What's the last thing? The URL that you're hitting. Because this is a post, you're just hitting the student, so slash API slash students. That's all you need to know. Let's do the same thing for the delete and for the modify. The exact same thing. Instead of post, I'm going to say put. That's it. The same thing for, and of course you can simplify this and refactor it and put a method. Sure, all the best to you. Do that. I just want to show you the point here and show you everything right away. Okay, so this is just, we want to be careful here because I said added students. In here we're going to say changed records, and in here we're going to need to say modified, deleted records, right? So it's delete slash students, but in here the delete endpoint for us doesn't just take a body. It doesn't take a body at all, actually. It cares about the student ID. That's really all that it cares about. So we modified our function here just a tiny bit. Okay, so now basically I'm going and iterating and saying on batch save, give me all the added and build requests for the added student, give me all the changed and give me a put for all modified student, and give me all the deleted and give me a delete on the deleted students. What's the last thing? I want to take that whole batch request and send it over. So await this.api broker dot post batch students async, and I'm going to go and say batch requests. See what I just did there? So this way, basically, I went and said, give me all of these requests compiled together, just pile them all up, and just lump them all together and send them over to the OData Batch enabled API endpoint and let it do magic. Now, I have to be honest with you. This is really a quick and dirty way, so I'm going to disable some validations on the API so things don't just fall apart in terms of validation. But you know, this is because this is a POC and I'm just showing you how things work. We're gonna have to skip some of these validations just to get through with the details. If you're following my series though, so this is the modify. I'm gonna just disable all of this. And this is the retrieve. I don't care about that. There's the add. There you go. I'm gonna disable this one too. And then I'm also going to disable the remove. Don't need any of this except for the maybe student rather. There you go. I'm going to disable all of this here. So now I have these API endpoints. These are running. And I'm just going to go up in here. Of course, you can go to this branch, the OData Batch, and take a look at it. I'm going to leave it up in there so people can take a look at this. But basically, you have all these validation rules. Now I'm going to start my API again, and I'm going to start my UI. And let me show you some real magic. Let me show you how this is going to work. So let's just make sure our API is running. So now API is running. Great. Let's run the UI. Here we go. Okay, here's where things get very interesting, right? Let me copy here. So I want to start with add, right? It's CRUD operation. Let's start with add and then update and then delete. So I'm going to add a record in here, right? I'm going to say Michael J. Fox. So that's a record that I just added in my system. Okay. I'm going to go modify an existing record. So instead of M, I'm going to say Muhammad, like this. So I modified a record. And then I'm also gonna delete a record from here. So I'm just gonna go and delete this record from here. Delete it, just like this. So I added a record, I modified a record, and I deleted a record. If I go and click update, let's see if that works. It says, are you sure you're gonna save the changes? Yes, I am sure. Does it work? It works just like a charm. So it went through the API, it posted a whole batch of changes, and it just sent it over to the API, and your API handled it. This is OData dancing, literally dancing with Blazor to make sure that they're doing a really strong shake hand. This way you don't have to implement add individually or modify individually or delete individually. Just as simple as this, enable OData on your API and integrate your Syncfusion Grid with Blazor in your OData batching. Everything comes together, boom, you have an up and running system that you can rely on, you can look at, very simple and easy. Okay, and so on. It goes just like this. You can continue to add records in here. Let's try it with multiple operations. If I go and say, I'm gonna do add, and I'm gonna go here and say, Michael Jordan. Michael, I don't know what's Michael Jordan middle name is, but Michael Jordan. Let's go up in here and add another one. B. Linus X Torvalds. I don't know what people's middle names are, but here Torvalds like this. Let's go and modify, Hassan. I'm just gonna say, I'm gonna even type it in my own native language just to see if that does anything with the validation. So I'm just gonna change this into my own native language, just like this, right? So here's that modification. And then, let's just, let's modify something else, I'm going to say Michael J. Fox. Awesome, because I like Michael J. Fox. Here's a new record that I can add in here at the bottom. I can go and say, well, William M. Smith, whatever you have. And then I don't need this record here. Let's delete this one. Okay, so I did a bunch of things. Let's go and update and see if this thing gonna blow up. There you go. So you see, you're working with a record. It actually did save, a different language kind of thing, seamlessly and very simple, without any issues. That it saves you a lot of time from a productivity standpoint. You have OData, dancing, shaking hands with Syncgrid, Syncfusion SF Grid with Blazor, and you just implemented all the CRUD operations in a time as simple as, I guess, 52 minutes if you're talking as much as I do. But that's pretty much it. Please, let me first, before I do this, let me just point you out to the right places here, just so you can go back and watch this. This is here, I'm just going to say here, CodeRub update UI. So this is its own branch. It's called OData Batch UI demo. I'm gonna put the link for this code in here. Let's go up real quick in here just to show you where you can find this. If you go to GitHub, and if you go to my profile in here, and if you go to the repositories, you'll be able to find OData Batch UI demo in here. Okay, so this is where you can find this awesome stuff, right? I might just throw in there a Giphy for you just to show you how this works. So that's one part. And then the other part here is on the API. You want to know what I did on my API? You want to see the exact steps and all that? I already saved that in a branch. I can go up in here and say, config add OData batch configuration. This is a demo, so nobody can actually merge this PR because I disabled some stuff. Of course, your tests are going to be failing. So where do you find this second API component from OtripleS? You can find the library right here. Let me find that for you. So this is GitHub. If you go into OtripleS, you're going to see in the branches area, there is the OData batch right here. You're going to find these modifications. You're going to find all the things that you might want to look at. If you look at the last commit in here, add OData batch right here, you're going to find all the changes that I've done to make this API work. So hopefully you'll be able to try it yourself. Please try it at home. This is really, really important that you learn, these kind of capability as a web developer or an API developer. So the last thing, last but not least, if you want to learn more, if you type OData Batch like this, you'll find a nice article that I posted on Microsoft Dev blog about all-in-one and OData Batch. I'll walk you through some of these steps, step by step. Some things have changed. Like this is with the .NET, I think 3.1 or .NET 5, and things have changed since then. So, just read through this and watch the video, and I'd be more than happy to kind of answer your questions. That's pretty much it. I highly encourage to continue learning, continue evolving, continue building things that are always easier and better and safer way of doing things that used to take a very long time. Doing something like this back in the ye old days, not even long ago, just if 5 or 10 years ago, this would have taken us days. Today, even with the demo, with as much talking as I do, it's only right around 55 minutes. I thank you all for watching, and I hope this was useful to you. And as usual, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please please leave a comment in the comment section. And as usual, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in another video.